Forget the image of frantic stockbrokers hurling themselves from Wall Street windows. That's the myth. The reality of October 29, 1929, Black Tuesday, is both simpler and damning. The market didn't cause the Great Depression, it just stopped lying about it. The crash was the engine seizing. Everything underneath had already broken down, quietly, over the prior decade, while everyone was too busy getting rich to notice. The 1920s looked like a miracle on paper. Assembly lines were pumping out cars, electric grids were lighting up cities, radio was stitching a continent together. Corporate profits were climbing, but the money wasn't moving, not downward anyway. It was stacking up at the top. A Detroit factory worker in 1927 was running machinery twice as productive as anything from 5 years prior, and his paycheck showed almost none of it. U.S. manufacturing output climbed 32% through the decade. Wages moved 8%. That gap is the whole story. The economy was a factory that had figured out how to build twice the product with the same people, except those same people couldn't afford what they were building. Goods piled up in warehouses, prices got cut, factories shuttered, workers got shown the door. The dominoes were already stacked and leaning. Wall Street just knocked the first one over. Now look at 2026. The clothes are different, the technology is different, the underlying math is not. Today's version of the 1927 Detroit floor worker is the white-collar cognitive employee, the software developer, the copywriter, the middle-level manager. Generative AI has handed corporations a productivity spike. Companies are leaner, margins are fatter, and shareholders are doing fine. But the cognitive worker's paycheck isn't reflecting any of that. Purchasing power is flat, grinding against inflation that refuses to budge. The wealth concentration mirrors the 20s almost point for point. The people who own the capital layer of AI are accumulating at one end. The consumer base is being carved out at the other. Meanwhile, corporate spending on AI infrastructure is enormous, and recent 2026 surveys show that most executives can't actually point to meaningful productivity gains from the adoption. OpenAI is reportedly staring down a $14 billion loss for 2026 alone. We're producing digital output at scale. The cake keeps getting bigger, and more people every year are going into debt just to get a slice. We're watching the same movie, just with a different soundtrack.
The obvious question about the 20s boom is if workers couldn't afford the goods, who was buying them? The answer is that nobody was, not really. They were borrowing against their future selves. Installment buying was the decade's financial innovation, the original buy now, pay later. By 1929, 6 out of 10 cars and 8 out of 10 radios were purchased on credit. The underconsumption problem didn't get solved, it got papered over. People weren't spending real wealth, they were spending their future labor. When the future showed up, the well was dry. In 2026, that same mechanism is running at a scale that makes the 20s look financially conservative. Installment buying has been replaced by BNPL schemes embedded directly into your phone. A $20 pizza delivery split into 4 easy payments. Individual consumers are stretched. Zombie corporations, kept breathing only by their ability to roll existing debt into new debt, are shuffling through the markets. Sovereign governments are sitting on debt-to-GDP ratios that have no real historical precedent. The whole structure runs on a single assumption: tomorrow will always be richer than today. That assumption is cracking. In March 2026, BlackRock was forced to limit withdrawals from a flagship debt fund after redemption requests surged. That's not a footnote, that's a pressure gauge blowing. The private credit market, which swelled to fill the gap left by traditional banks after 2008, is now drawing direct comparisons from veteran analysts to the conditions that preceded Bear Stearns' collapse. The smart money started moving quietly months ago. Retail investors are still watching the scoreboard on a handful of high-performing stocks, just as they were in 1928. The leverage in the system today is deeper and better hidden than the margin trading of the 20s. It runs through unregulated decentralized finance and institutional derivatives positions that most regulators can't fully see. Zero-day to expiry options, ODTEs, are swinging billions through the market in hours. Meme coins spike and crater on a tweet. Gamified finance built on phantom capital. Even the exit doors are rattling. Gold, the asset you're supposed to hold when everything else is on fire, moved $600 in 5 days in early 2026, a $200 rally followed by a near $400 drop. Between 1973 and 2023, the average annual price move for gold was roughly $36. That single 5-day window was 16 times the historical yearly average. When the safest asset in the room starts behaving like a meme stock, the room has a problem.
In the late 1920s, the people sitting on excess capital made a choice. They could have pushed it back into wages, into infrastructure, into something with a foundation under it. They didn't. They fed it into the stock market instead, and the market obliged by climbing, detaching degree by degree from anything happening in the actual physical economy. Corporate profits were real. The prosperity was not. It was a scoreboard that had stopped reflecting the game being played on the field. And it wasn't just the wealthy running this play. The 20s democratized the gamble through margin trading. An ordinary person could buy $1,000 worth of stock with only $100 of their own money, borrowing the remaining $900 from a broker. On the way up, it was a brilliant arrangement. Everybody felt like a genius, and the market kept climbing because more borrowed money kept pouring in. But it was a house of cards with a timestamp on it. When the market finally began correcting in October 1929, brokers issued margin calls demanding their loan money back immediately. The only way to meet those calls was to sell, so everyone sold, at any price, all at once, the panic feeding the collapse feeding the panic, until the whole structure was rubble. The parallels in 2026 are not subtle. We have not learned from the margin call. We have simply made the gambling faster, more complex, and far harder to see clearly. Zero-day to expiry options, zero DTEs, allow billions of dollars to swing through the market within hours, driven almost entirely by algorithmic movements that no single human is tracking in real time. The speed itself is the danger. By the time a retail investor processes what is happening, the institutions have already repositioned. In 1929, the famous warning sign was a shoeshine boy handing out stock tips. The moment speculation had trickled all the way down to the street corner. Today, the equivalent warning signs are meme coins evaporating overnight, NFTs that sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars, now sitting as worthless digital receipts, and speculative bubbles being inflated and popped by TikTok trends and coordinated algorithmic trading working in the same direction at the same moment. The leverage sitting inside the 2026 financial system is a different beast from the margin trading of the 20s, not because it is smaller, but because it is invisible to most of the people exposed to it. It lives inside unregulated decentralized finance protocols and inside institutional derivatives positions stacked on top of one another with the kind of complexity that makes the 1929 brokerage system look like a ledger book. The 1920s margin trader at least knew he owed his broker $900. Today's retail investor has no clear view of the derivative exposure sitting 3 layers beneath the index fund in his retirement account. Underneath it all, the same structural disconnect is quietly running that defined the 20s collapse. The 1920s factory worker watched manufacturing output climb 32% and took home an 8% wage increase across the entire decade.
The 2026 white-collar worker, the software developer, the copywriter, the mid-level manager, is watching generative AI hand their employer a massive efficiency windfall, while their own purchasing power stays flat against inflation that refuses to move. Corporations are leaner, margins are fatter, shareholders are being taken care of, and the gap between corporate profitability and the consumer's actual spending capacity is being quietly filled month by month with debt. The digital output is real. The prosperity it represents is not evenly distributed. The core is hollow, the surface numbers still look reasonable, and the borrowed time is running shorter.
The Depression wasn't inevitable. After the 1929 crash, the damage was real but containable until the people in charge started making decisions. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930 was the first big one. Facing a slowing economy, U.S. politicians did what politicians do. They looked for something to blame outside the borders and slapped heavy taxes on imported goods. Europe retaliated immediately. American wheat, American steel, hit with tariffs of their own. Global trade didn't just slow down, it froze. Volume dropped 66% in a few years. Every nation grabbed for its own slice and ended up with nothing. The bakery burned down. In 2026, the same move is being run from the same playbook. This isn't occasional tariff friction anymore. The world's largest economies are actively decoupling. Supply chains are fragmenting. Export controls on advanced microchips are tightening. Resource nationalism is fashionable again. Politicians facing domestic slowdowns are pointing fingers at trading partners, and the machinery of global commerce, which requires velocity to function, is grinding slower. Essentials get more expensive. Growth gets harder to find. Then there's the Strait of Hormuz. The ongoing conflict involving the U.S. and Israel against Iran has produced something the already stressed global system has limited capacity to absorb: an energy shock. Iran's de facto blockade of the strait has sent oil prices swinging with a volatility that's rarely been seen. Energy costs don't stay in the energy sector. They move through transportation, food production, manufacturing. Every input cost in the economy climbs, and the consumer, already stretched, absorbs the difference. The IMF is projecting global growth of around 3.3% for 2026. That number assumes the shocks stop arriving. They haven't stopped. Gold moved $600 in 5 days in early 2026. The average annual move is $36. When the asset that's supposed to be the financial system's ballast starts swinging like a penny stock, it means the anchor is dragging. The decoupling, the energy blockade, the debt overhang, the hollowed-out consumer, these aren't separate stories. They're the same story, hitting at the same time. In the 1930s, it took a tariff war to turn a depression into a catastrophe. In 2026, the tariff war is already running. So is everything else. The 1929 crash didn't have to become the Great Depression. That part was a choice, made by the people whose one job was to prevent it. The Federal Reserve, facing a contracting economy and a cascade of failing banks, raised interest rates, not a little, decisively. Their reasoning was the gold standard. The dollar had to stay convertible to gold at a fixed rate, and defending that peg took priority over everything else, including the thousands of local banks that were going under, taking their depositors' life savings with them. The Fed chose the peg. The banks died. Credit froze. What could have been a severe recession calcified into a decade. In 2026, the safety nets look more sophisticated on paper. Deposit insurance, unemployment buffers, central banks that have at least read the postmortems from 1929 and 2008. But veteran investment managers like Yakov Weinstein are flagging something the safety nets weren't built for:
a cycle that has simply run out of road. Aging demographics, compounding healthcare costs, and a debt load so large that cutting interest rates now risks igniting inflation rather than stimulating growth. The old tools are still in the drawer. They may no longer fit the lock. The danger in 2026 isn't a carbon copy of the Fed's 1929 contraction. It's the opposite problem. The line between the Treasury and the central bank is blurring, and monetary policy is drifting toward the electoral calendar. Voters care about food prices, gas prices, and mortgage rates, and there is mounting pressure to cut rates prematurely to smooth those numbers before an election. The result of cutting into an already stressed system wouldn't be stimulus. It would be an inflationary surge running alongside a slowing real economy. Stagflation dressed up as relief. The fractures are already surfacing. BlackRock limiting withdrawals from a flagship debt fund in March 2026 following a spike in redemption requests is the kind of event that gets footnoted in the calm retelling and screamed about in the actual moment. Analysts are drawing the Bear Stearns comparison directly. Meanwhile, gold, the instrument investors reach for when they've stopped trusting everything else, moved $600 in 5 days in early 2026. A $200 climb, then a near $400 drop. That same asset averaged a $36 annual price move across the 50 years between 1973 and 2023. That 5-day window was not normal volatility. That was the anchor dragging. What's compounding all of it is that no single crisis is arriving alone. Energy shocks, geopolitical blockades, and a private credit implosion are hitting the system simultaneously, a poly-crisis where each pressure point amplifies the others, and central banks are being asked to fight several fires with a single hose. In 1929, the Fed failed to grasp the depth of the underconsumption rot beneath the surface. In 2026, there is a real possibility that institutions are making the same category of error, mistaking AI speculation and cheap credit for genuine fuel without noticing the tank is nearly empty.
A recession is a bad quarter. A depression is a structural collapse that takes a decade to climb out of, if you climb out at all. The IMF is currently projecting 3.3% global growth for 2026, which sounds stable until you look at what's holding the floor up. The 1929 collapse wasn't bad luck. It was the predictable result of 3 specific conditions running simultaneously. Extreme wealth concentration, an economy propped up on borrowed purchasing power, and a global trade system coming apart at the seams. All 3 are present right now. AI is doing to white-collar work what the assembly line did to manufacturing in the 1920s, compressing labor costs, concentrating the gains at the top, and leaving the consumer base with less real money to spend than the stock market's valuations require. Add the 2026 blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, add the active decoupling of global trade networks, and you've rebuilt the same pressure system that blew the roof off in 1929. Different parts, same blueprint. So what do you actually do with this information? Cut the debt first. The installment buyers of the 1920s weren't ruined by bad intentions. They were ruined because their future labor stopped being worth enough to cover their past spending. BNPL, revolving credit card balances, variable rate anything. That's the same trap with a better interface. When the squeeze comes, the people carrying the least debt have the most options. Get skills that can't be automated. AI is already compressing the market for mid-level cognitive work. The roles that will hold value are the ones requiring physical expertise, high-level craft, or the kind of human judgment that doesn't reduce to a prompt. That's not sentiment. That's where the remaining wage premium is sitting. Understand what you actually own. The 2026 gold market swung $600 in 5 days in an asset that historically moved $36 in a year.
Speculative assets are behaving like casino chips. Tangible assets with real utility are the only things that stay anchored when the digital scaffolding shakes. Whether 2026 becomes a footnote or a chapter depends on one thing: whether enough people see the structure clearly before it moves. The wealth gap is real, the debt load is real, the trade fractures are real, the speculation is real. These aren't vibes, they're the same variables producing the same pressure that detonated in 1929. The math doesn't care if you're paying attention, but you should be.